Okay, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are watching this live stream. I'm excited to be here. Just want to make sure everything is running smoothly. So I'll be working off of two screens. So if you see me kind of like bouncing back and forth, that's what I'm doing. Let's see here. Sure. So today we're going to be talking about depression, anxiety, self-care, which is hot button topics, especially during this pandemic, especially in 2020 when everything was really at the height of it all. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And I'll be introducing myself a little bit later. So our focus for today, usually when I do sessions like this, I like to do a quick grounding technique just to get everybody in the space to receiving the information. Often, we're running and gunning and just moving, but it's really a good time to kind of like just sit and pause for a moment. Then I'm just going to do a brief introduction about like depression and anxiety, some of the signs, some of the things that we need to look out for. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Superwoman Complex, which is something that I find a lot of Black women struggle with, and also somatic, how to recognize somatic signs of depression and anxiety. And I'll get into details of what somatic means and some of the things that you can do now immediately to start alleviating some of those symptoms. So before we get started, I just want everybody to just take a deep breath. Just take a deep breath in. I'm going to do a 3 count. 1, 2, 3. And as you take that deep breath, I want you to expand it as deeply into your lungs. Hold it at the top. And then take the deepest exhale that you've taken all day. Now I want you to take another deep breath. Same thing, same 3 count. 1, 2, 3. Hold it at the top and then exhale. And now I want you to do it at your own pace. And just take a moment to pause. And as thoughts might be coming up for you, no need to attach to them. Just let them flow through your mind and just sit in silence for a moment. There's nothing to do here except to just be. Take another deep breath. 1, 2, 3. Hold it at the top. And then take another deep exhale. Sometimes just breathing allows us to get grounded before we start doing anything else with our day. So I would like to get started first with a story. This is a story about this woman who didn't know she was living with, I call it high functioning depression and high functioning anxiety, which I feel a lot of people deal with, and didn't know she was dealing with this until it fully disrupted her life. Depression and anxiety looked different for her. She wasn't someone who couldn't get out of bed. In fact, she never missed a day at work. She even worked late if she needed to. From the outside looking in, everything seemed fine. She laughed, she socialized. But when she got home and closed that door behind her, it was a different story. She would overeat to compensate for the sad feelings inside and used food as a tool to manage her emotions. She felt like she was living a double life, almost like she was faking it. She would wake up without a smile, but arrived at work with a smile, acting the role that people around her expected to see and experience. Things were getting done in her life, but it was never at her fullest capacity. She never used her full potential. And if she told someone that she was depressed, they probably wouldn't believe her because there's this idea that your life has to be falling apart for you to be depressed or even anxious. when she would find herself panicking from mild panic attacks that constricted her chest, blocked her throat, and made her heart beat a mile a minute. She didn't know what to do except to pray that it would just pass. On a good day, she gets through it. But on a very bad day, as it continued to worsen, she arrived late to work. She became forgetful. She had a hard time concentrating, distracted. And maybe on those bad days, she's not able to get out of bed. Getting things done at that point required an insurmountable amount of energy that she didn't have. And she began to notice the struggle, but she had to bring her A game and prove to everyone around her, including herself, that she had this. She had to be the best at whatever it was. And that story is really about me. And in 2013, I suffered from severe burnout and I quit social work. And depression and anxiety, they have many faces. And I found myself in a space where I needed to really take care of myself and really address the depression, the anxiety, and all the underlying symptoms that were preventing me from living the life that I knew that I could. And I'm wondering if any of you have felt this, if any of you have gone through this, where it's just like this invisible force that's pretty much dictating your behaviors. And so when I burn out, I got the help that I needed and went on a long, long healing journey. And often what I say to my clients is just because you carry it so well doesn't mean it's not heavy, right? And sometimes we take pride in being able to manage so many different things. I have underneath the flight path, so I don't know if you guys can hear it, but sometimes we take pride in a lot of these things when they have an adverse effect on our lives. As I said, depression and anxiety they have many faces. It's not as obvious as we might think, and often it comes in episodes for people. In other words, it comes in waves, right? It's the invisibility of these conditions that we need to be mindful about. And some of those symptoms, as I listed here on the slide, could be joylessness, loud inner critic, that voice that just won't go away. You have frequent self-doubt spirals where you're fine one day and the next thing you know, your thoughts just start running and taking you down. And sometimes there are sleeping problems, right? You have low energy and exhaustion. Either takes you a long time to fall asleep, you don't sleep at all, or you're sleeping too much. Sometimes you find yourself blowing things out of proportion. You just have all these mood fluctuations that tend to impact your day-to-day. Sometimes you find yourself excessive worry, right? Thinking about the past and thinking about the future. You never find yourself in the present moment. And you find yourself using unhealthy coping strategies, whether it's substances, or for me, it was food, or you have this constant feeling like you're feeling just sad, just blue all the time, or you struggle with perfectionism, or you have a hard time like concentrating or remaining still. But I want to say a caveat, just because we experience these symptoms from time to time, it doesn't mean that we have depression or anxiety. The true differentiator in all of this is, does it disrupt your life in one or more areas simultaneously? Is it affecting your relationships? Is it affecting your work? Is it affecting your health? And that's when we need to be really focused on making those changes. So for instance, maybe you can't get out of bed because you're too depressed to take care of yourself. And that would be more along the lines of like major depressive symptoms, when you might need to see a doctor to really get to the physical aspects of that. But I find that folks who are in, whether they're entrepreneurs or in management positions, they function pretty well, but they're slowly inside really having internal conflicts and struggling. And in the worst case scenario with folks who struggle with high functioning depression or high functioning anxiety, the worst case scenario is they commit suicide. So if you think of it, it's like you're inching closer and closer to the fire, but you don't feel it until you're completely burned from it. And that's what happened to me when I completely just had a literally like emotional breakdown and had to step away to really take care of myself. So I'd like us to transition to anxiety. As for anxiety, you might know that feeling, right? We are sometimes, some of us, we get anxious, but it doesn't really like disrupt our lives. We might get a bit nervous, our hands might get a bit clammy and sweaty, our hearts beat really fast. Maybe we start overthinking things and we get a little bit nervous. But the idea of anxiety is it hijacks our emotions and keeps them locked in place, usually in a fearful state. For instance, someone who experiences severe anxiety might avoid certain places, certain people, or certain situations because it activates their anxiety. And there is such a thing as high functioning anxiety. And I don't like to use too many labels because it's different for everybody, but it might look like an overachiever, somebody who uses their anxiety to propel them forward than actually have them frozen in fear. But however, some folks might find themselves because of the anxiety, arrive really early for appointments, right? Just to kind of like calm those nerves down. Maybe they need constant reassurance, asking for directions multiple of times, checking frequently to see if they're doing it right. Maybe they find themselves procrastinating for long periods of time. I don't know if you find yourself doing that. And then like when it comes to crunch time, you're sprinting, but you do that quite frequently, right? And then you find yourself ruminating, having these thoughts and you dwell in the negativity, the what if situations. What if I make a mistake? What if this happens? What if that happens? And then sometimes you find yourself inability to say no, or you're constantly busy, overloaded with schedule. And that was me. When you're overloaded with your schedule, when you're constantly busy, it's a distraction. You don't need to really think or feel about the things that are happening in your life. And you might struggle with insomnia, difficulty sleeping, constant racing mind. And at the end of the day, the anxiety controls what you do, what you say, and who you spend time with. Your actions are constantly dictated by your anxiety. So you find yourself, again, likely choosing activities that will calm those racing thoughts rather than pursuing activities that you probably would enjoy, but it limits you in the sense that it doesn't allow you to expand your horizons. Both depression and anxiety create a false sense of self, and it stunts your growth and isolates you from the outside world, sometimes mostly like in an internal way. And a quote that I love, and the name escapes me who says it, but one can choose to go back towards safety or forward toward growth. And growth must be chosen again and again. And fear must be overcome again and again. So it's a daily decision to really step into and lean into those areas that feel really scary so that we can overcome them. I want to talk a little bit about somatic because this is very important, and you'll find that somatic symptoms will come about when you're in depressive or anxious states. And in general, so somatic is just a fancy term for dealing with the body. So it's almost like the chronic stress and tension, all of that impacts our bodies in so many different ways. Like, for example, do you find yourself with aches on your body that you're like, I don't know why my back hurts, like what's going on, pains, constant headaches. I used to get severe migraines when I was struggling with depression and anxiety. I don't have migraines anymore. Maybe you find yourself getting sick easily. It impacts your low immune system. So you find you're getting constant colds. You're like, I don't know why I keep getting sick. All of this, it plays out from the struggle with depression and anxiety. Everything that we deal with, if we don't deal with it, it gets held into our bodies in different areas in our bodies, which get in the way of us feeling good, like physically feeling good. And so it's so important to address and be really self-aware about what am I feeling like physically, and making those connections sooner than later. And we'll get into, I'll give you some tips later at the end about what we can do to actually start noticing some of these things. I wanted to touch briefly about the Superwoman Complex, which is something that I see and something I did, right? I was doing everything and then until I couldn't do it anymore. And this is a real struggle for specifically Black women. I think it's women in general, and even men too, like having to have this facade that I can handle everything that life throws at me, and we're human and we just can't. And so what happens over time, this whole Superwoman complex becomes a habit. We train ourselves to think, feel, and behave in ways that reinforce our depression and anxiety. And the environments that we live in also have a tendency to reinforce it as well. Again, this is even worse for Black women, mostly because we're dealing with microaggressions and racism and all these things in our lives that just add to the layers and layers of the difficulties. And so because as Black women, we have to double down, we have to work twice as hard. What happens over time is that we become identified with the identity so much that we actually believe, for lack of a better term, that's normal to be this way, that is part of life. But I'm here to tell you that it's not, right? And so there's a dark side to the Superwoman complex. It's the fear of showing vulnerability. And this also relates to depression and anxiety. It's the fear of saying, hey, I need help. Hey, I can't do this today. I'm struggling with this. That fear of vulnerability is going to prevent you from getting the support and making the changes, the long-lasting changes that you need in your life. So it's the inability, when I think about the Superwoman complex, it's the inability to give up control because you feel that either no one can do it the way that you do it, so you just don't delegate. Or you think really the deep down, the root of it all from talking to my clients is that you just don't want to be disappointed by people. So you just don't give people a chance to take on tasks, right? Or to do things for you because people might disappoint you, and they probably will, because humans, we're flawed, right? And so in order to avoid this disappointment, in order to avoid losing control, you double down even further, right? You deepen that Superwoman complex. However, it's a recipe for burnout. It's a recipe for resentment. It's a recipe for isolation, and it stunts your growth. And you think you're growing by adding more to your plate. Maybe you're getting more accomplishments, but what you're doing is you're creating distractions and barriers. And when you create those, it negatively impacts your relationships. But most importantly, it negatively impacts your relationship with yourself. And then when it does, it leads you to lose perspective. You lose clarity in some cases, and then you end up losing a sense of self, right? And as Black women, seasoned multitaskers, right? You too often put multiple families and businesses and needs ahead of your own well-being, which means support systems don't exist when there's an emergency. Asking other people for help is hard, yet overcoming this behavior and its underlying fears is crucial for personal and business growth. I don't know if you ever heard of Ariana Huffington, who fainted and bumped her head a long time ago from severe exhaustion, okay? And so as we suffer, some of us, from the Superwoman complex, we believe there is no limit to what we can do at all the time. And so for as long as we can, we continue to move this way. And that's a huge issue because even just like a car can drive maybe 200, 300 miles without filling a tank, but eventually it runs out of gas. So it's so important for you to think of yourself like that. Like you will eventually run out of gas. And when you do, what is there to support you? But I'll even challenge and say, well, what can you do beforehand, before that happens? And that's really the key here. So I want to talk a little bit about self-care. And I always say self-care, sometimes we often use self-care as a Band-Aid because it doesn't get to the root. And often when we use self-care as a Band-Aid, it doesn't become a lifestyle. Self-care is a lifestyle. It's an embodiment. It's an intentional way of living because you must first create an environment that's able to detect stress and then understand how to ward it off. And I just call that boundaries, right? How do you create more boundaries in your life so that you can really balance out your well-being and create harmony? I don't think there's a balance, but I think you can create harmony, you can create a rhythm so that you can dance better with the things that come up in your life. And so self-care, again, is a lifestyle. And it's not about being perfect because, biologically, we do feel stress. But if we're able to recognize that and create the space between the stimulus and the response, then we can really be able to manage it and implement it really quickly instead of getting caught up in the whirlwind, right? It's feeling things, it's reeling things in before you've literally sacrificed your relationships and your health to the point of no return. So to embody self-care means to make a promise to yourself. It's in the decisions you make, the way you speak, the relationships you keep. And it's also in the spiritual relationship you have with your heart center. You essentially breathe it. You can interrupt the stress again before it completely derails your life. So we're going to get into some self-care tips that you can actually start implementing pretty quickly. First and foremost is getting to the core of why you put yourself last. Why do you delay taking care of yourself? Or why you ignore caring for yourself? It's also getting to the core of your depression. What are those running thoughts going on? What are they telling you? I always say emotions are just feedback. The way our bodies feel are feedback. They're sirens. And so if we decide not to listen to them, if we decide to ignore them, then we can't make those changes. And we get them. We get those red flags all of the time. And we just delay and we delay and we choose ourselves last over and over again. And there's a consequence for doing that. So get to the bottom of why you do that. And usually I find it's because self-beliefs, negative self-beliefs, there needs to be a shift in your mindset because everything begins with the thoughts up here. Some people say depression, anxiety, it's biological, but I have to challenge some of that only because it depends what's happening in the womb, right? Because it depends what your mom was experiencing herself, that when you were born, did you see some of those things or those learned behaviors? Babies aren't born with all of these things unless there's a neurological disorder, unless there was womb trauma, that sort of thing. A lot of this stuff is just learned behaviors that become habits over time. And we have to teach ourselves, retrain ourselves to begin to do things differently, to gain new perspectives, to start looking at things differently, looking at ourselves differently. All of those things. I work with a lot of founders, and one of the things I remember a founder saying is, I schedule me time in my calendar. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do that day, but I know that on Tuesday between 3 and 5 or 1 and 5, that's going to be me, and I can do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to show up fully and not think about everything else that's going on. And so it's a time for you to just unwind. Don't just wake up and work, then go to sleep, work, wake up, work, go to sleep. When you wake up in the morning, how is your morning going to set the tone for the rest of the day, right? I'm sorry, somebody's making coffee here, so I hope that you can hear me. So learn to, again, create more boundaries and say no more. We often are not saying no enough. So I want you to practice saying no more and find ways to have more fun. Often we feel the heaviness is because we've disconnected from the joy. We've disconnected from the play. When we spend our formative years as children, what did we do? A lot of us played. And then when we got to be adults, we no longer did that anymore. And so we need to reconnect with that childlike self in a positive way. And in finding more ways to be more present. And that could be mindfulness activities. Some people say, meditation doesn't work. And often if you're really in a very traumatic state, it might not work, but being able to just sit in silence and just put a timer on for 30 seconds is something that we can do, right? A 1 minute, just to be able to pause, get in the habit of pausing and slowing down and being mindful. It could be mindful eating. So when the plate comes in front of you, don't just rush off and eat it, right? Just take a moment, look at the meal, be thankful for the meal, and then eat slowly. So you can practice these little ways of creating more mindfulness into your life. Oh no, thank you. So that you can actually have a much bigger impact. So self-care means taking time to do the things that you enjoy, the things that make you feel good. It involves everyday activities that you find relaxing, fun, and energizing. And again, these activities can be simple as reading a book or taking a really big vacation and just doing it solo. It means eating regular meals. So don't skip out on meals unless you're just not hungry, but getting enough sleep, caring for yourself, personal hygiene, anything else that maintains good health, eating good foods, it's going to nourish your body. Self-care has to be a priority. There will always be other things to do, but don't let those fires interrupt the time that you set out for yourself. Self-care should be given the same importance as other responsibilities. Almost, to me, I always say it has to be like part of your value system. The same way you value like honesty, the same way you value respect, you have to value self-care enough to actually do it on a regular basis. So set some specific self-care goals. Make it clear, because if it's vague, it's difficult to follow. So for example, instead of saying, I will take more time for self-care, get specific. I will walk 30 minutes every evening after dinner. Make it a habit. Choose activities that you can do easily and often, that you'll find that you'll stick with it. Don't bombard yourself. I'm going to walk 30 minutes every day. Don't do that. Pick a day and then, add some more days as it becomes a habit, and then set boundaries to protect your self-care. Remind yourself that your needs are as important, if in fact not more, than anyone else's. So a few minutes of self-care a day is better than no self-care at all. Whether you set an alarm to remind you to take regular breaks, even if it's just a walk around the block or an uninterrupted healthy snack. Oftentimes, stepping away will re-energize you to work even more efficiently when you return. But I also don't want you to think like, I'm going to do self-care just so I can work better, right? You want to do self-care so you can feel better and have more harmony and alignment in your life. So avoid unhealthy activities, substances, overeating, unhealthy behaviors. They might help temporarily, right? Like I'm going to get myself a dessert because I'm feeling sad. It might be a temporary dopamine hit, but in the long run, it will have complications. So even if you're not feeling good, even if you're not feeling well enough, just commit to doing 5 minutes of self-care into your routine as well. And this is stuff that we already know, but we're not doing. And the reason we're not doing is because we haven't gotten to the root as to why we're not doing it. Okay. So what can you do now? Very first thing is just become self-aware. Like, really sitting down. I always recommend my clients to keep a journal and start writing down their thoughts and feelings, especially like when they're noticing certain kinds of thoughts, because we often have certain kinds of thoughts in certain moments, certain times of the day. So start tracking those moods of how you're feeling without the focus of changing them, right? The point is to become more self-aware, okay? And understanding that emotions are not meant to make us feel bad, even though it does feel bad. It is just feedback. It's just about getting more understanding of where you are in your current day, in your current life. I always recommend making sure that you have some sort of support plan, a support system in place, whether that's friends, whether that's a therapist, a coach, a healer, something in place that you can actually go to, whether it's books to help kind of change your perspective. Get outdoors and into nature. I never used to be a big outdoors person, but as I lived abroad, I started getting out into nature and doing more hiking. But spending time in nature is scientifically proven to help elevate our moods. So even if you're just sitting next to a tree, sounds a little wonky, but it helps. And finding ways to move your body, whether it's dance, find something that feels good. Don't go running if you don't like to run, right? Maybe that comes later. But, join a dance class online or something, find some type of movement that feels good. And then look at your nutrition. Foods are directly impact our moods. So if you're eating a lot of processed foods and processed sugars, especially those kinds of foods that make this just crash, start eliminating those from your diet. And some techniques that you can do, especially when it comes to anxiety, we call it the five. So find, especially when you're in your moment of anxiety, the very first thing is not to think yourself through it. The very first thing is to really get settled into your body and to breathe. Breathe. One of the things I recommend is to, and I do this when I'm feeling a little like, okay, I'm feeling this coming up, is to hold your nostril on one side, breathe all the way that you can here, and then close the other side as you hold it, and then breathe out. And you do that a few times, and that's going to help regulate your nervous system as well. Sometimes when we're anxious, we're not able to kind of like see or feel or hear things. So the best thing to do is like, okay, as you're breathing, what are 5 things that I could see? Well, okay, what are 4 things I could hear? Okay, what are 3 things I could touch? Okay, what are 2 things I could smell? All right, and then what are 1 thing I can feel differently than what I'm feeling now? And that's because anxiety is all about distraction, right? So doing those things will help you get more in the present, right? Because you're looking around, you're doing other things. And if you do that often enough, you will teach yourself how to kind of break the habit of getting hijacked by your emotions. And then when it comes to your thoughts and depression, I recommend challenging a lot of your thoughts. And you could do this with anxiety, because anxiety is about like fear, right? We're fearful about something happening in the future, or we're thinking about something in the past. But ask yourself, is this happening right now at this moment? Challenge the thoughts that you're having. We often don't. We just kind of agree with them. We run away with them and say, yeah, but you need to challenge them. Okay. So I might be afraid that something will happen in the future, but is it happening now? No. Okay. If it's not happening now, what is true for me in this moment? The truth is I'm healthy, I'm safe, I have support systems. So find things that are true, that are contradictory to the anxious or depressive thought that you might be having at the moment. Okay. I mean, there's more that you can do. I can't cram it into like an hour presentation, but there is a lot of things, whether it's books. I also, as I wrap up, you can find me on Instagram. I have this overthinking sheet that I give to folks that they can just download and start practicing some of those things. There's also the core beliefs that I provide folks so that they can start addressing what those core beliefs systems are that are preventing them from really shifting their mindset, because often the belief systems in our minds are other people's, right? So we have to question, wait, is it me that believes that? Or did I get that from my caregivers, my parents? Whose belief is that anyway? And you can find me on YouTube as well, where I just give out videos and put videos together about some of the stuff. And I will leave it up to for some questions, anything that you may want to ask as well. And maybe I'll stop sharing my screen. Let's see here. All right, do we have any questions? All right, if we don't have any questions, okay. Are any questions coming in? I don't think I said my name. I'm Francis, Francis Elise. So what I do with women is I help them to shift their mindsets so that they can rise and thrive in all areas of their lives. I'm a clinical social worker, but I now operate as a coach just because I think that there are limitations to talk therapy. And there are other ways that we can, find ways to heal, and so that we can move forward in our lives. All right, so someone's going to go ahead and check to see if we have any questions. And I'm going to put this in the chat too. Carrington, if you want to drop this into the Facebook as well, so that folks can have access to some of the worksheets, the overthinking worksheets, the core belief worksheets. And if you want to sign up with the newsletter and stay in touch, and also the YouTube channel. Okay. I love talking about this stuff because, okay, when you're feeling overwhelmed by your sadness, what do you do? So one of the questions I would ask is when you're in that moment of sadness and overwhelm, what do you typically do? Do you distract yourself? Or do you sit there and actually allow yourself to go through those emotions? Because that's important too. The more that we suppress our feelings, the more they show up in different ways, right? So they might show up differently behaviorally, and they might show up in the tasks that we do. So when you're feeling very overwhelmed by your emotions, I want you to take some time to just pause for a moment, and then start writing all the feelings that you're having and all the thoughts that you're having. And again, I want you to sit down and question, are these thoughts and feelings that I'm having, are these actually true? And where are they coming from? Because usually it's an inconsistency happening from our thoughts to our realities. And often, sometimes it's because we want something to be different. And I find that often as well. When we want something to be different, we struggle with the sadness of that thing, or we're anxious because of that thing. So part of our challenge here is to accept that that thing may not be different. And so when we know that it won't be different, then what can we do about it, right? So for example, maybe we're overwhelmed by finances and we want those finances to be different. But how do we create a plan to make that different, right? But in this moment, it's not going to magically appear, right? So part of that is a bit of acceptance. It's a bit of grieving, right? Grieving the things that we've lost, allowing ourselves to move through those emotions without judgment, and writing those things down, getting it out of brain dumping and getting it out of our thoughts and out of our bodies. And then take a moment and move, when we're feeling overwhelmed and sadness, sometimes it wants to pull us and just keep us in that state. So what can I do to kind of like feel good for a moment? And I recommend physical movement, a dance, go outside for a walk. So all these things are at our fingertips to do. It's choosing to do them in the moment when we feel like, oh man, I don't have the energy to actually do them. But mustering up the courage to say, I know if I do this, it will begin to shift and change my feelings and my perspective about things. Because all of this is just a habit. We've developed this as a habit, a way of coping. And so now with habits and learned behaviors, we can change and unlearn a lot of different things. And we start replacing them with things that are very helpful for us. But we have to choose that. We have to choose it in the moment. It's a good question. And sometimes just talking it out with someone will also help. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed being here with you all today. I hope to keep in touch, and feel free to reach out to me if questions do come up a little bit later. You can email me at hello@defyingresistance.com, and feel free to go to defyingresistance.com to read any material that might be able to help you make those long-lasting changes and shifts in your life. All the best, everyone. Take care.